Hey, folks, welcome to the show. I'm Sal. I'm joined today by Tom King. Tom, thanks very much for being on the show today.
What a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, man. You rock.
Oh, no. You are the one who rocks, man. You're the one who creates art, and I'm the one who talks about how dumb it is until I read the damn thing and then I go, oh, I'm the dumb one. Such as it is with Rorschach. I know Rorschach is like old, man. That was like your blue period when you were like, fuck everything, man. Here's something dark.
Here's some nihilistic stuff.
Here's something nihilistic.
There's my blue period. I like.
Well, because you were saying, like Supergirl is so much more hopeful, and it's, man, it's funny because you want to say like Supergirl some of your best stuff, and then I read Human Target, and I'm like, oh my god. My wife though was like, no, Supergirl is the best thing.
I like Supergirl. It helps with Bilquis art. That makes that.
Oh,
but then I just got the Smallwood art in for some, and I was like, whew.
I saw, and is that the hiatus art? Is that the art that's coming?
That's the art that's coming. Yeah, and it is some sexy stuff. I mean, it is some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen on a comic book.
Yeah, it reminds me of like an earnest version of like a 1960s kind of flick. Like it reminds me of you remember Down with Love? It's not from the 60s, but it was like that parody of the 60s, but like if it was meant. Like, because it's got that, like, it's HD, it's beautiful, but also keeps that aesthetic, and it's just, oh, yeah. But we're not talking about anything new. We're talking about Rorschach.
Yes, we're talking about Rorschach.
Yeah, because I read Rorschach. Yeah, I'm glad you still like it. It's not like, oh, man, I don't want to talk about Rorschach, man. I wrote it, and I just had to purge it from my system, and then now here it is. But
I love talking about it. I feel like it's a book people have to sort of give a chance. You have to overcome some obstacles to get into Rorschach.
Right? Yeah. There's a couple of levels, and I wanted to kind of tackle those a little bit. So this will be more of an actual kind of interview because I do have questions as opposed to me just going off on a tear and then you interrupting me to go, that's no, and then just go off on your own. So, but the thing I had to ask first was regarding the Rorschach book. And it's one of the obstacles, I think, for a lot of people, which is like, why? Because this could have been its own thing.
Yeah, I think it's a great question.
But like, why Rorschach? Like, did they go to you and go, "We're doing Rorschach with or without you? You better tell us something," or was it like, you have an idea and you're like, "I think it could fit Rorschach"?
No, so this was an editor in chief who goes Dan DiGio, back in the day. Dan's Dan and I always got along.
Yeah.
He's a big guy. He's kind of a very big personality. And Mitch and I had just got off Mr. Miracle, and we're like, wait till you hear our plans for Adam Strange,
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, that sounds great, but can you, like, how about if I put you on a character that actually sells? Like that.
Fair.
He's the publisher. That's this fair question. And so at the time he was like, we need Watchmen. That's a brand in DC that sells. Batman sells and Watchmen sells.
Fair.
And she's like, you do Rorschach. How about you and Mitch Rorschach? And I was like, not only no, but hell no. That's a terrible idea. I'm already an Alan Moore, like, poor clone of him. I don't want to be put on a shelf next to him to be compared. I mean, there's all sorts of issues with doing him. You can't. How do you even do it again? Watchmen did everything right.
Yep.
My phone is ringing in the middle of the night. Who the fuck is calling me?
Right at this hour?
Oh.
Oh, actually, that's really important.
You're like one of those things like, oh, my kids are all asleep, so they can't be in trouble. But then, like, I don't know, but could it be like my father? Who's calling you this?
Yeah.
It was another YouTube podcast. It was Comic Historian thing. Like, talk about it. So I gotta go.
You actually had me for a second because we're friends, and when I tell him stuff like this, where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to Tom King, he's like, son of a bitch isn't gonna get Tom King before me.
So I didn't see a way to do it smartly. I thought it would be incredibly idiotic.
Yeah.
And so that time passed and two things happened. Number one, the Watchmen TV show came out.
Yeah.
Which I very much enjoyed. And when I saw it, it was almost like a revelation because when I first tuned in, I was like, this is going to be crappy. It's going to be like Watchmen, but over 10 hours instead of over 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, it was not in the mood for it. And it came out and it was set in the modern day. And it wasn't about the things the original Watchmen was about. It wasn't about the rise of fascism and superheroes. It was about like race in America and like the lies we tell each other.
Yeah.
But it used Watchmen in a way where it was like, we're not repeating Watchmen. We're using the language of Watchmen to sort of signal that this is an important story. It was like using it as a language instead of as something to copy.
Right.
Which I found to be inspiring. And so I was like, oh, you can do this. Like, and also people were into it. Like they were able to set aside and get into it. So both from just an artistic standpoint and from you can get an audience engaged standpoint, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
That was step one. Step two, I did Batman Annual 4 with Jorge Fornes.
Yeah.
And that was one of my favorite Batman issues ever. And when I was getting the art back, and that's an issue where I did 7 different stories in 7 different genres, and Jorge drew them all. There's like a Western genre and a monster genre and a mystery genre, a boxing genre. And as I was getting I'd worked with Jorge a little bit before. I was the one who sort of plucked him off of Twitter and put him into comics. But when I was getting those pages, and I was like, oh, Jorge's like a genius. Like I had found an incredible storyteller, not just a guy who could draft, but a guy who had something in him, like, like Gabriel Walt on Vision, or and so I talked to DC, and they're like, and again, this is a totally different management than today, but they did not see what was in Jorge. They kind of were like, he draws like David Mazzucchelli. We what do we need? I was like, yeah, he draws like David Mazzucchelli. David Mazzucchelli is one of the greatest.
He's genius. Yeah.
We've got for 30 years we've been, people who draw like Jim Lee. We might get, 1 or 2 that draw like Mazzucchelli,
That's true.
And so I knew Jorge he was going to go off to Marvel. People were pitching him. I was like, I got to find him a project. And so I knew they wanted me to do Rorschach. I knew a Rorschach could be done. So I used his leverage to be like, if you don't let go of Jorge, then I'll do Rorschach with him.
Oh, that'll get him.
And then then that's the birth of Rorschach. So yeah, it was those 2 things. And then it became a matter of how to not make it a bad cover song, which is
right, which is a tall order, because it's, at the end of the day, when you look at anything made in that world, I mean, especially like the Before Watchmen stuff and then the Doomsday Clock after it, like some folk are like, I mean, Alan Moore talks about like raccoons going through his trash, and I was equally skeptical of the concept of Rorschach, especially since it had been done before. Like there had already been a Rorschach book, and I was like, yeah. And I read the first issue, and it undeniably Jorge Fornes's art was like next level. Like there was something there, but I don't know if it was because it was so methodically paced, or if it was because I was just still not in the mindset, because I didn't watch the show when it first came out. I was like, no.
No, I had the same instinct. I wouldn't watch it. My wife wanted to watch it.
Yeah.
So it was the same thing, yeah.
I'm sure my wife would love it because she's a genius. But yeah. So, but reading it again, finally reading it, it needs to be together. You can't read it month to month. There's no way, because I ripped through this freaking thing, and by issue 7, it was like 3 a.m, and I'm like, I have to go to bed, and I had nightmares about it, which is great. I think that's the mark of a good piece of literature, right? Because it wasn't like the nightmares. Okay, so like I remember the other time a comic book gave me nightmares was, and this is blasphemous because nowadays it's the best, one of the best intercompany crossovers of all time. But I remember when JLA Avengers came out, and it was just so much. And Perez is a genius in terms of being able to fit everything on pages and make and every panel and make it cohesive. But I remember having this nightmare when I went to a comic book store and every book was like JLA Avengers. And I grabbed every book and I'm opening it up and I'm just like, I can't acclimate myself. There's just so much. And then the next time I had a nightmare was Rorschach, and it was the tone and the feeling of
every book is sad and people are staring out windows sad. Oh my God.
No, it wasn't cosmetic.
There are no superheroes fighting.
This was like the dread, like the you could feel the like this rage, this underlying feeling of like, I don't know. There's something there that's just there's a cagedness to Rorschach that I'm like, oh yeah, that's good stuff. And I don't want to feel like that all the time, but when you do, it's like, okay. so creating Rorschach was in some ways a backdoor way of getting Jorge Fornes to not leave for Marvel,
It was
which is a good move. Yeah. But you obviously were inspired from conversations we've had before to talk about kind of like the world we were in at the time, which I guess was the inspiration for setting it 35 years after the events of Watchmen, setting it in the present day in that universe.
Yeah, this was written in, I guess, spring of 2020, right?
Yeah,
right at the tip of the fun, right?
Yeah.
And I wrote it because of that, because that was sort of where comics stopped for 6 months.
Yeah.
It gave me a chance to write it all at once, which I had never done before. Usually I write an issue here, an issue there.
Is that true? You don't write it all, like, because there's some that say you're like some of your greatest strengths are these like maxi series where it's like it all is in one chunk, but you don't write it all like at one.
I mean, up until then, which is now 2.5 years ago or whatever.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah.
Oh my God. But yeah. I mean, that's not too far. I mean, once I was on Batman, I was on Batman from 2016 almost to 2020.
Yeah.
For 85 issues, and that was double ship. So that was like you wrote issue 17, then you wrote issue 23, and then you wrote issue 6, and then you wrote issue 5, and you it was completely out of order, and it was this there. And if for a second the train stopped, you did a Mr. Miracle on the side, and then went back on the train.
Yeah,
like Batman was, it just had to keep moving, because if Batman doesn't come out, I mean, this is the first thing they told me when I first got the gig, and I was all 2 years into comics, but they're like, if Batman is late, there were comic book stores who won't be able to make their rent that week.
Oh my God.
Because they count on the income from their Batman subscribers.
Yeah,
so you could never have Batman be late.
That's a lot of responsibility for for the Batman writer and for the editor. Like that's maybe that's not how the things should be structured. But I don't know the best way to wean off of that at this point.
Well, I'm sure now they're probably setting their numbers by X-Men and Spider-Man's.
Maybe.
But writing in chunks.
Yeah.
It was writing in chunks. So that's I was always sort of scrambling, and it was taking the deep breath, and like you said, you read it all in a chunk. I wrote it all in a chunk.
Yeah.
And it was right at that sort of peak dread moment of sort of America is sinking, and we're injecting disinfectant in our arms and all that bullshit. That sort of the beginning of 2020.
Yeah, there is. Right, because there's this undercurrent. Well, there's overtones of ingestion, of taking in something that is demonstrably fake and turning it into like a super serum that motivates you to become something ugly.
Yes.
And I think that's a big element of this series.
And the idea was that I purposely had this detective who has absolutely no background.
Yeah, what was the motivation there to give him no name, no background? Was it just because he needs to be like is he the placeholder for Ditko's creation? Or, I'm sorry, Meyerson's direct creation?
I mean, so throughout, in 12 issues, he reveals one background of one piece of information about himself. In the 11th issue, it's sort of the climax when he has sort of a very big moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was so blank that I remember in the beginning, Jorge was like, had drawn him sort of sitting down. Jorge's like, I can give him a tattoo on his arm. What tattoo do you want me to give him?
No.
And I was like, and as a writer, you're like, oh, he could have this tattoo. Oh, he could have like Dr. Manhattan's little dot, and that could be symbolic of his, or we could put. But then I was like, nope. I was like, I have a rule. I'm creating a fictional character that has no background at all. The idea was, and this is a theme throughout the whole thing, he's a Rorschach test. He becomes what the reader thinks he is. If you look at him and you're thinking about he's Columbo, if you're looking at him and thinking, this is an Orson Welles thing, if you're looking at him and thinking he's a detective, like he himself, the detective, the lead character in this Rorschach book, is a Rorschach test about the reader. So that was the idea, that he becomes the reader. and then the reader
Okay.
sort of experiences what he experiences through that.
I know that some are also likening him to the Mark Ruffalo character in The Cut.
Yes, and Mark Ruffalo, yeah, from the Zodiac movie.
The Zodiac movie, that's it. Yeah,
yeah.
I remember one of the things that I took away from this, and it was why I brought up the Oscar talk off mic, was you're there. I think you are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like you are a comic guy and a movie guy, and you blend the two in this like very ultra stylized kind of like deliberate way, like where you infuse your love of film into your love for comics, and it's emblazoned all over your office. It's in it's in the ink, but you know, I feel like there is this like Citizen Kane meets All the President's Men plot, like married to Watchmen, married to Ditko in this piece. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, it's I mean, I think the one unfair thing is that I don't think there's any single comic writer out there, and probably not a comic artist, who's not like also a movie fan. I've never met them.
I guess you're right? Like everybody I ever have talked to is like has a really strong opinion about a particular subset of film.
Yes, I think you're right about me, but the one thing is that I'm not unique in that.
Right.
But absolutely. I mean, it's especially this movie drew on you know, a combination of some old noirs, which I'm always drawing on, and like you said, 70s sort of paranoia thrillers, which I went to specifically because like those were all made sort of in the shadow of Watergate and the sort of us becoming, you know, disillusioned with government. It's always said when I was a kid, and I was like, oh, we feel like we're kind of in a Watergate moment again at the beginning of this pandemic, where we're sort of like, it felt like we didn't have faith in sort of our institutions to protect us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I purposely sort of echoed those into this. I sat down with my wife and we watched, you know, Parallax View and all those kind of movies.
Yeah.
And you're dead on. With a lot of comic book stuff. Boy, there's a lot of comic book stuff.
There's a lot of comic book stuff in a way.
Frank Miller is in it.
Frank Miller is literally a character in the book. Can we talk about Frank Miller being in the book? Was that one of those things where you're like, I want to use Frank Miller, I'll ask him? Or was it one of those things where you're like, let's just see what he says when he sees himself in this book? Like, I'm sure you had to talk to him.
I asked him before I started, and he said yes. But then the negotiations, it was very, very difficult.
Really?
Like, it was one of the most difficult. Not because anyone was being mean,
like obtuse or difficult,
obtuse or difficult. It was just legally. Frank has spent his. I mean, Frank, when he was, you know, 25, was, you know, out on the ramparts yelling about how poorly they were treating Jack Kirby. So literally for like 40 years, Frank has seen big corporations rip off comic book creators. And so he was understandably reluctant to be like, I don't want DC to own my likeness. You know,
that's fair. Yeah. Okay.
And so just to get that legally ironed out between the lawyers at DC and Frank himself, and I was like, that's totally legit. At one point, Frank, like the solution was Frank was going to sign his likeness over to me, and I would. So I was like, well, I'm going to own
license it.
Yeah, okay. Good license. Yeah, but he didn't want, you know, Frank Miller toys to be released.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which is totally fair. But yeah, he was always in the original Watchmen. Joe Orlando appears. He's in the Joe Orlando, if people don't know, is a DC and EC artist and DC editor, and he appears in the back matter. So he's not in the actual comic book, but he does appear. So I like that idea that sort of real comic book creators worked on these famous pirate comics.
Yeah. And
I wanted to bring in a big creator, and a lot of this has to do with I'm spoiling a little bit out about the book. You guys will still love it. I apologize for it.
Oh yeah, no, don't.
But there's a moment where I talk about a moment in comic book history that's a real moment in comic book history, where Otto Binder, who's the creator of Supergirl, this is back in the 60s. He was a little older, then he's a golden age writer, so you can imagine. His daughter had tragically died, had been hit by a bus. The actual inspiration for Supergirl, the basis of her, had been hit by a bus and died. And Otto Binder went a little crazy after he very much believed in UFOs and stuff. And a group of comic book super fans, including Frank Miller, so there are like 3 or 4 of them, went down to visit Otto Binder, to pay like their respects, to be like, man, we love your comics.
Yeah.
And they had a seance. This really happened.
I had no idea that this was a thing.
Yeah. And they had a seance to talk to his dead daughter, basically.
Yeah.
And they all sat around a table, and each of them sort of tried to talk to a dead. And they recorded it because so a recording exists of it. And Frank Miller's 16 at the time, talking to Otto Binder. And then the way the seance worked was he believed that sort of you would talk to the dead, and then you record it on a recorder, and then the electronic. And so then they listened back to the electronic noise to see if they could hear the dead talking to them. And I love comic book history. When I was like, that's a Rorschach test, right? Like, it's a sound Rorschach test.
You're hearing what you want it,
and you hear what you want to hear. And so that's when I first sort of thought, okay, I want Frank to be in this, and I want to talk about sort of that moment of going back in time and to a real historical event, which was this, combination of all these sort of factors.
Holy shit! I did not know that was real.
It was surreal, because I talked to Frank, and he had, because I read about this in some history book, and Frank hadn't heard it, he hadn't remembered it.
He was 16.
He was 16. So whatever, this was, over 50 years ago. And I was like, I'm putting this in the book. And he's like, what? He's like, oh, I was like, so this happened? I had a transcript of it, but I didn't know if he remembers it.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember going back. Oh, that poor man. He was so sad about his daughter. And it was funny because he remembered that he asked to talk to his grandmother. He's like, this is what my grandmother, it was really moving to talk to Frank about sort of that moment when he was 16 years old and kind of made this pilgrimage.
Yeah. Yeah. Holy shit. I'm sorry. It's just blowing my mind. This is one of those things where it's like when you absorb something like this, there's so many different layers and aspects to it that like, and I'm fascinated by history, and comic book history is fun because it's like, as you know, and I'm not lecturing to you, I'm talking to the people who are watching. But comic book history is fun because like you have kind of like this access, as you can kind of see, to like some of these creators to like know a little bit more about them, especially in today's world. Like, I think that there's probably more like 60-40 in terms of the comic book audience that meta reads comics at this point. Where they don't just read the book and go like, boy, Spider-Man's in for it next week. Like, now, like, legitimately, like today, people like, Nick Lowe, he's gonna get it, and I'm like, okay, first of all, he's not gonna get any, leave him alone. But secondly, like how do you even know who the editor is? Like, like only the nerdiest of the nerds should know the credits. And not only that, but like their Twitter handle, and you're messaging them, and but there is this access, and I think it makes them more human, and it makes them more like real, and so it takes these like godlike figures and turns them into like human beings. I think that's what this comic also kind of does, because it's like it's about comics as much as it's about America, and yeah, fuck. Sorry.
Well, that's again, if you're gonna do Alan Moore, you got to do like. When I first approached this, I didn't want to do a cover song of Rorschach, so we threw out the 9-panel grids, we threw out the back material, we threw out the chapter titles, like he had those cool chapter, the quotes at the back end,
they're gone,
all that in the bin. But what we kept was sort of that spirit of like, it has to talk about today, and it has to talk about comics.
Yeah.
So we kept our vibe, like that was, directly taken from, Alan Moore on High.
Yeah. Ditko is a massive element to this book.
Such a weird book. All these things that are combined in it. Yeah,
I know. Yeah, it's like it's Frank Miller. It's, oh my god. Yeah, there's so many elements to it, and I'm sure there's more. And one of the things that I noticed, and it's why I wanted to get you on the show, it's really for me, but whatever, is because, and I want it to be like kind of a compliment, because I'm going to talk about this on my big show where we make fart jokes on a couch, and I'm going to talk about this really deep, important book. And I want this to be like a compliment.
I like farts on couches. That's good.
Thank you. So do I. But I want to. I want it to have like a compliment where we're like, no, I actually do take this shit seriously, and we want to talk about like, and I want to get into the nitty gritty about like what this is, and clarify some elements to it. And so Ditko's this big element to it, and of course because Ditko created the impetus behind Rorschach. But what I didn't know, and what took me down the rabbit hole, and I know that this, which is that Rorschach isn't really I'm sorry, the question isn't really the inspiration for Rorschach. It's actually Mr. A.
Yeah, it's actually Mr. A, or it's a combination.
It's a combination, like because Mr. A, was it? The question is just Mr. A, but for the comics code, like it's a cleaned up version, kinda, of Mr. A.
Yeah.
But this presupposes the idea that like because you're right, this book talks about comics, but also can't possibly talk about comics without talking about Watchmen. But it is in Watchmen, so what would be the analogs / what would be the world where there was no Watchmen because this is Watchmen, and it would be that Steve Ditko was not an objectivist.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't an objectivist, then who would he worship? And if it wasn't Ayn Rand, it would be her polar opposite, which is Hannah Arendt.
Yes,
which is a philosopher. I'm not. I took one philosophy class in college and was like, I can't.
That's all right. Yeah. That's smart that you picked all that up. That's awesome.
No, it wasn't all by myself. I had to fucking look up stuff.
Good. At least it's out there. Yeah. I was reading old comics journals, which is a stupid thing that I do.
No, that's a cool thing you do, and that's like, and it makes you write these kinds of things where you could talk metatextually about comics and make dummies like me go, "That was really cool," and you're like, "That actually fucking happened," and I'm like, "Oh, duh." But yeah, please continue.
And I was reading their sort of analysis of Mr. A, and of course, being the comics journal was very deep and long and detailed, and they had a lot of like pictures of sort of like his notes on it, and if you look at them, they're insane. Like they're not they're beautiful. Like there's like beautiful drawings, but they're the rantings of a crazy person, right. And they look like, I was like, oh, Steve Ditko is Rorschach. Like he's like, it's like there's genius there, but also there's like a certain amount of insanity.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, okay, so he and the insanity is this obsession with objectivism and with Ayn Rand's philosophy. People who don't know what Ayn Rand is, she wrote the book The Fountainhead is her most famous book, or Atlas Shrugged. And basically her idea is that like there are some people are better than other people, and it's the government's job to get out of the way of those people so that they can rise up and lead us to glory
and be profound. Yeah, exactly. Well, and this idea that like there's a black and white, there's no moral ambiguity.
Yes, exactly. And then that's what Ditko, like if you go online and watch the famous YouTube video where they interviewed Ditko, he doesn't go on camera, they don't show him, but he's like, this is what my comics are always about. Comics say suck because comics say are about that, but there is a right and there is a wrong and there is, and it's a very interesting theory. When I was in college, I knew so many people that were obsessed with it, but it's like it's the road to fascism. It's the idea that a small group of people should be controlling the rest of people, because they know what's right and wrong, and a lot of people don't. So he was like obsessed with that theory, and to the last day of his life, was drawing comic books about that theory. And so I wanted to make someone equally obsessed, but instead of being obsessed with sort of a figure on the right, I used a figure on the left because we're in the Watchmen world, so it's a little different. Yeah. So I used Hannah Arendt, who wrote about the problems with totalitarianism, and was also a German Jewish immigrant.
Yeah, she would know because she's a Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, she was a Holocaust survivor. And but came from like the same place where it was like these are two
extremes,
contemporary the German women who migrated to the United States but had completely different views of sort of that experience left them. So I did a ton of research into her and read not all her books because she wrote a bajillion, but read a bunch of her books so that he's Ditko, but he's Ditko at a different starting point with a different sort of obsession.
Yeah,
but in the same sort of way.
Now, I have to ask because since it is Ditko, or it's Will Myerson. Frank Miller's in the book. The creator of Supergirl's in the book, but Ditko has an analog. Is it because you were just like, I'm not going to deal with the Ditkos, and it's just so much easier if we just don't? Or is it like, no, it actually fits the story if I can go, because I think there's a freedom to like, if you make it an analog, like with Frank Miller, you can't have the Frank Miller character in the book like shit himself and like be a fool. You want to give, because he's a human being who can be like, hey man, fuck you, I'm gonna kick your ass. But with Ditko, it's like, I don't want to tarnish him. I'm gonna make this. I can go further. I can take liberties with this character, and it doesn't have to be a 1-to-1 as opposed to like a literal figure that or could.
Yeah, I think there's two factors which you're identifying. Number one, who would want to deal with Ditko's
people,
very litigious people.
Yeah.
And the second factor is this was not, like I said, it's not Ditko. This is not a person who is.
Yeah, it's not literally Ditko.
Yeah, Ditko's would hate this person. Like,
oh yeah,
like they created something that's like Citizen, that's like Mr. A, but it's called the Citizen, and there is to participate in government. And like it's the opposite of everything he stood for. Yeah. So he's more like an anti-Ditko than a Ditko. So I didn't think it would work if it was actually him. But the litigious thing was definitely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I like those two different things.
This is just irrespective of that, but the fact that like Ditko was an objectivist and he was a subscriber to Ayn Rand's philosophy. By the way, looking into Rand, I didn't realize this, but like I was looking into some of her notes, like like Ditko wrote his own notes in the margins and shit. Apparently Rand like wrote like Rorschach talks, which I didn't notice. It was sentence fragments that were like just these obtuse phrases, and I was like, oh my god, that's deep. Like, all right, way to go. More way to pull that, and then way to pull that because Steve did the same thing.
Ayn Rand was no, she was no dummy. She knew what she was doing. Yeah, she might be the most successful
grifter and all.
Well, propagandist. I don't know what you would call her. Like she's convinced more people of her philosophy being true than almost any other philosopher.
That's true.
If you went, I live next to Capitol Hill. If you went to Capitol Hill right now, you'd find 50 very powerful people who think The Fountainhead is the greatest book ever written.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm sure. Yeah, that's
I mean, Paul Ryan is Paul Ryan, who was almost vice president of the country.
That's right.
Was famously an Ayn Rand.
I'm sure he really understood it too. But I love. But my question given, do you think there's any objectivism and Ditko, Randy, and politics left? Like, do you think he put anything into Spider-Man? It's just a very random tangent, but I was just curious. Like, do you think?
No, it's a fantastic question.
Or do you think Stan just was like, "Oh no, none of that's going in there"? Because I feel like when you look at early Spider-Man, you look at like Peter. He is very much like he's an individual, and he's very much like self-determined. And there is this kind of like me versus them. Like if I were in charge, things would be different kind of mentality, like that they kind of very quickly strayed away from. But I feel like those early Lee Ditko era Spider-Mans, like I think Peter is kind of like, I think he did read The Fountainhead. Like 15-year-old Peter thought that was a really profound piece of literature. And it wasn't until he like, got laid that he was like, oh, never mind.
I think there's a ton of it in there. I mean, famously, like there's like this famous anecdotes of like in the later issues when Ditko was doing both plots and pencils, like he had Spider-Man like go find some hippies and yell at them.
Yeah, him yelling at the hippies. It's such a rare instance, but it is there.
but I think what survives at Ditko to this day that you can sort of see is a sense of alienation, is a sense of I am someone special who is not recognized. That's that. If you read The Fountainhead, it's about a guy named Rourke who's like the most genius architect of all time. But because of all the crap that happens to him, nobody realizes what a genius he is.
Yep.
And that's why kind of people stick to it so much, because it's very easy in your life to be like, I'm an unrecognized genius. And that's kind of what it's about. So I think if you look back at the core of who Spider-Man is, he's kind of this awkward guy who has a great destiny, but the media doesn't recognize him in JJJ, and the government thinks he's crap and tries to get him down. But he's the Superman that nobody recognizes.
Right. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Yeah, exactly.
But there's so much of Stan in him that kind of
that overwhelms it. I think.
Yeah, that kind of good-hearted sort of the best of what Stan Lee was, which is
I think so. Yeah,
responsibility and power guy.
Well, we were. I remember on one of our couch shows we were talking about the early Fantastic Four. Was the early Avengers stuff, and you could see the like eraser marks from what Kirby was doing, and what's like where Lee's like every time Wasp does anything, she has to also say something really vacuous and really like really misogynist, and it's like she'll be like legitimately saving the day and also like, oh, he's dreamy, I could fall into the ocean of his eyes, and I'm like, okay, Stan, like, come on, man. Like, I'm trying to talk about how progressive these books are, and you're not doing me any favors.
I mean, you have to remember Stan, as a guy who did a lot of research into romance comics, Stanley wrote more romance comics than he did superhero comics.
That's fair. That's fair.
He wrote Millie the Model for 20 years. You know, he wrote a lot of very sexist romance comics. So that was it was a very easy gear for him to shift into when he probably had to do some dialogue late at night.
Oh, of course. No, big time. Yeah. Well, and you could tell like there's this contrast, especially with like the big power players like Avengers or Fantastic Four, where Jack Kirby's like, I want to talk about these powerful people and how they're like reshaping the world, and Stan's like, well, don't forget also that they're in love with each other, and it's like like off screen they'll be like, watch out for your snakes, like just a like Stan Lee added element to it. But switching gears back to the Rorschach episode, because of course we got to get back into the mud. Pontius Pirate, creation of yours / Will Myerson.
Yes, Pontius Pirate.
Pontius Pirate, the Spider-Man analog. I love that Fornes full page splash recreating the Amazing Fantasy 15 cover is inspired and brilliant.
My editor, Jamie Rich, who's now moved on from DC, he was a very quiet editor, you know, and I'm like, thank you for turning something in. He barely commented, but he's like, Pontius Pirate, I like that name.
I love that. I like that name. I thought it was going to be like, I think Marvel going to sue somebody. Like, but no, I love that. I like that name. Well, that was that. Not to be outdone. Dark Fight Returns.
Dark Fight Returns. Yeah. I went through a lot of iterations to come up with Dark Fight.
And I love that in this universe, like, you really play up the pirate thing, because it's like, and then the element of like, I want to talk about something real. I want to talk about superheroes, and I'm like, oh my god, I love that element of this where that is the real world, and it's not goofy children's stuff like pirates, which actually are real, like.
Well, I read Watchmen, you know, probably 2 or 3 times before someone pointed out to me, do you realize in the Watchmen universe, instead of superhero comics taking over pirate comics, like, I didn't get that the first few readings.
No,
and then you read the one panel where he's like ex-pirates. There's like a bunch of comics, and they all have like new pirate mutants, and like, oh, he's making a commentary of like, it's just completely random that we all embrace superheroes instead of some other genre.
Right? It could have been something else.
It could have been something
that
else.
was that's funny. Yeah, so with respect to using real characters and infusing them into that world, this is you were talking about how we talked about 3, but who else did you manage besides yourself? Because obviously there's a little cameo at the end with I think. Is that you and Mitch at the end?
That's Jorge drawing.
Is that Jorge?
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
I had some. It's funny. I had dialogue over that originally. And
you can tell because it looks like you're talking. Like, it looks
like we're talking, yeah. And Jorge got mad at me. The commentary was like, "Do you think Will Myerson would have loved like that?" He's like, "Oh, I think he would prefer a check." It was.
I kind of like that.
It was a joke, but I was reading. And I was like, it's too meta a joke. It takes you out of it.
You think that's too meta? There's a full page. If you haven't read it, there's a full page splash that is a literal shot for shot recreation of Amazing Fantasy 15, but in pirate theme. But that would have been the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of.
My favorite part of that was I did a copy of 6 15 and I did it in so that all of the grammar matched up to what Stan had in the original cover copy. It's actually a Kirby cover. It's not.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah.
And so when the copy editors came through, they're like, "Oh no, this is all wrong." and they corrected it, and I was like, no, no,
it's supposed to be wrong.
That's the original. That's just in Stan Lee grammar. That's
awesome. I love it.
We have to move it back to the original bizarreness.
Yeah. Where did the kid come from for you? Is this this is a kid that would be reared in the Watchmen universe? Like, if you grew up in the Watchmen universe, it'd be fucking weird. But you can tell there's more. There's more to it than that. I mean, like, I got some serious Preacher vibes from the dad and kid sequences that I'm like, God damn.
Yeah, there's some fucked up stuff. The kid, I mean, first of all, she's a tribute to the old noir aspects of it. These are some deep cuts, but like her name is Laura, which is a very famous noir, and Laura is a noir about a guy who sort of falls in love with a girl he never meets and just sees a picture of her. It's about a detective who sort of is a detective investigating the murder of someone, and he falls in love with someone who he's investigating, which is kind of what the Rorschach was about. It was about a detective who kind of falls, gets too involved in the murder they're investigating.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. And then it was also taken from another noir called Gun Crazy, which is about two bandits on the run and sort of getting worse and worse as they go. And she's modeled a little bit after the character in Gun Crazy. Peggy Cummings.
Okay. Laura Cummings, yeah.
Yes, her name is Laura Cummings. So that's sort of where her out. There's a famous scene where that in that character in that movie's kind of cool because they're two trick shots. They're from a circus trick shot show where they're like the best shots in the world.
Yeah.
And they decide to become bank robbers. So it's like a superhero movie because they can shoot any target. They're kind of like two like bullseyes, together.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where her and her powers came from. And her origin, I mean, like she grew up in this small town in Wyoming, Hannah, Wyoming, which is where my father grew up.
Oh shit!
And it's a very small town, and all that stuff about like the mining accidents and the
graveyard
and the mining graveyard. That's all true. That's all still there. And it's about sort of, and I visited those places, where your father grew up. And those were, my family still lives out there. I still have tons of cousins out, so that like Panhandle, Nebraska, Wyoming area.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was about like that kind of area and how when you're sort of out there and isolated, some of these, I mean, the thing that happened, which they had in the TV show, which is the squid happened.
Yeah.
And then there's no real explanation for what the fuck that was, right?
Well, yeah, nobody finds out, right? Like that's
no, even in the TV show, to spoil the end of the TV show, like it turns out it's like this whole conspiracy that where they kind of fake more squid attacks and stuff. Like, but nobody ever tells them that this is happening. The general populace doesn't know this.
They never know that it's fake, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
all they know is that a huge alien squid came and killed, a few 100,000 people in New York, and then never attacked them again.
Right.
And that's a very bizarre fact to live with for 30 years, and I think it would drive some people insane and to some people to paranoia. The same way, sort of, the metaphors, like the way Q was driving people to paranoia at the time this was written. Where when you're looking and you're, when there's a fucking pandemic that's killing you, you kind of start turning to any source you can to sort of get away from that. And it's kind of understandable. So yeah, that's sort of where it came from. Sort of, how paranoia can rot a brain.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's at the end of the day, like its ideas are infectious and be careful where they come from and what the motivation behind them is, and maybe there isn't one. And like the sequence where Laura's with her father and he talks about like reading, I mean, never mind the mother aspect, but just when he's like, I was reading an old Meyerson book about the Citizen, and it made me like it made me start to think, like I started to change my mind about like my craziness about like all the terrible things that I've been, like how I raised my daughter to be a killing machine. Yes. And that's what I knew the squids had got in my brain. And the idea of like, yeah, like if there's this inexplicable phenomenon to the average American and all you have is your own paranoia to explain where it came from, and you already have like a confirmation bias, like who knows where that'll go, but it's not going to be anywhere good or productive.
Exactly. And the original squid wasn't just a teleported squid.
Yeah,
it was like
telepathic.
It was telepathic, right?
Yeah.
Like it got inside people's brains,
right? And it's like, so yeah, if I have like invasive thoughts, maybe that's the squid telling me what I don't want to hear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the idea, like this. That's just that metaphor of like this dude being like, I almost had like a better way of thinking, or like a contrary way of thinking. Like there was a way of thinking that was contrary to my own bias, and so for a minute, like I questioned my own, fortitude, and that made me realize that it's actually aliens infecting my mind, and I had to die. And I'm like, that is so angry. like there is this. I know.
Happy book.
I feel it so much where it's like, yeah, if I was in 2020, yes, like where it's like people would rather die than hear anything contrary to their own bias, and it's like, wow. And that's when I was thinking about when I was doing some research for Rorschach, and this is what ultimately prompted the conversation, because I was just like, I was hunting for, because I was like, well, obviously when Rorschach dropped, when issue 12 dropped, every news outlet just pulled your ear to talk about an in-depth analysis of the book. No, they didn't, ladies and gentlemen. There's no videos and there's no discussion about it, and I think that it's because this book is 20 years too late. I think that this book is exactly where it needs to be at the right time, but the comic book industry isn't, and the consciousness isn't where it, like, where a book like it, like, I think this is Preacher level, where it's like, but Preacher hit like that audience and it grabbed them and it stayed there for 30 years. Right? It's been there. And Rorschach is like, well, and today it's Tuesday because everything's fucked up. Like, like, yeah, like, it's like, no, but this is really saying something about it. It's like, yeah, so's everything, man. Like, I don't want to feel bad. I just want to watch reruns of Supermarket Sweep, if you don't mind. Like, I don't want to fucking think about that. And it's like, but that's so also prescient and contemporary. Like, that is, this could only come from 2020.
Well, I appreciate that all, and I appreciate people who, I used to watch old episodes of Match Game at the height of the thing.
Yeah, like, I needed some kind of comfort food. Yeah, no,
yeah,
exactly.
I wanted to watch people in the 70s, when life was good, and they were just their biggest worry was how sexist a comment they could make on TV. I sympathize with people who don't always want a dose of sadness. With their entertainment, but I also sympathize with people that, like, sometimes it's time for a Sunday and it's time to explore the dark side of our souls.
Yeah, well, because it's I know that I've certainly said it, and I don't think this is not taking joy in the darkness. This is not like a book, and that's the thing. Like, let's just say there are other Rorschach books that just revel in darkness and misery, and this is at least trying to say something about, like, what's happening right now, as opposed to just being like, superheroes are fascist monsters and beware.
Yeah, I had noticed it's not a commentary on superheroes. It's not here to yell at its audience to preach.
Yeah,
I hate books that preach. It's one of my new things. I hate books that are just like, I could have read your Twitter feed. Why am I reading your comic book?
Right. Yeah.
That's not at all what I wanted to do. Anyone who knows me probably knows my feelings on politics, and I think if I just presented my feelings on politics, they would be really boring in a book. So yeah, I wanted to go deeper than anything I could say on Twitter, which is what stories should do. They should go beyond just saying, like,
well, that's why
racism is bad or whatever. It's like, you already know that. You have that in your head. You
exactly.
need to get deeper into, like, the consciousness of people.
Well, it needs to infect you, like the squid stuff.
The squid. You need to be a Rorschach test, so when you read it, you can see yourself.
Yeah. The comedian smiley face in Turley's room, in Turley's office.
Yeah.
Fuck, man.
Not crazy.
That moment is just like, it's such a gut punch, because you're just like, oh, like, once you see that, you're like, oh, I know. And then there's like the hero worship of the comedian, and you're like, oh my God, like, this guy's bad news, but also, like, what? Like, and but there's also this thing, like, you talk about preaching, and that's not what this book does. Like, I want to say Reagan, but no, it's Redford. I'm thinking of a different actor who was actually not president. But yeah, Redford's 10 years deep into his presidency.
No, he's like 20,
25.
Like, yeah,
25. 35 years after. So it's 20.
That's taken from the TV show. So this takes place in TV show continuity. It doesn't touch on the TV show events,
right?
It vaguely mentions that they happen in the background. Pay attention.
Yeah,
but yeah, in the TV show they had that Redford does what Nixon did and just keeps getting elected over and over again.
Yeah, well, like FDR. FDR also, like, went for a fourth term.
Yes.
But yeah, I love the idea that is explored, but also that it's wrong. Like, it's not just, you know, like it was, you know, we had a Democrat in the White House for 25 years and everything was great. You know, that's not healthy for America. And it's like, that's what you're saying. But like, you know, but maybe there is a little bit of a 2020 in there where it's like, yeah, but maybe not Turley though.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he was the right man for the job. I mean, he's got a little. He's more Lyndon Johnson than Trump. You know, he's got kind of
yes.
Well,
except Turley's like LBJ was a conspiracy theorist. He was a nut in his own way.
He was. Well, I mean, I took from like LBJ loved to talk to people while he was taking a shit. Was like how he'd sort of
that moment immediately. I was like, oh my god, that's because LBJ also wasn't he the one who had a nickname for his dick?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he
would be like, "Oh, like, hey, you want to see it because it's huge?" And it's like, "Okay, man, thanks."
It's like in the middle of Congress. Yeah,
truly a people's president.
Yeah. So I took some of that, but he's not a one-to-one. But I was very excited when I found the one panel in Watchmen where you sort of see a soldier walking by. And I was like, "Oh, that's him. That's Turley.
That's the one."
I was like, I did the math. I was like, "Okay, he could still be alive. He could be running for president.
Right?
Let's do it."
Okay, so what like little Lulu backup did a creator named Turley create? Because I have to assume that name came from some obscure fucking corner of comics that I've never heard of in my life.
Kurt Turley is my best friend from elementary school.
Oh, okay.
And hopefully he never reads this.
Yeah, lest you get into a McFarlane situation where it's like, oh no.
A very nice Mormon boy from Southern Los Angeles
is also yeah, that's amazing. I love it. It's a good name. It's a good name for for a political character. Yeah, let's
no
hope
idea what happened to him. I haven't seen him since I was 9 or 10 years old.
Well, that's a smart way to go. Yeah, because I can't use names of people that I know now where they're like, hey.
Yes. You'll see names. I especially I kill a lot of people that need to be named, and you'll see names repeat themselves of friends. And I'll throw you into something.
You already did, man. Whether you did or whether you meant to or not.
Oh, I probably did. Yeah.
Love Everlasting. There was an issue at the end of issue 1 of Love Everlasting. There's a Sal in the hospital.
There you go.
And I was like, is that me? That can't be me.
That's you.
No,
see,
that's just Sal. I just appreciate that he's not a fucking mobster. Because that's like Sal's don't get to be Batman is my old mantra. Like Sal's are low-level enforcers, they're mobsters, you know, Sal Maroni, Sal Valestra, they're all Batman kingpins. And I'm like, that's not what I want, man. I wanted to be Batman. And it's like Sal's don't get to be Batman. It's too ethnic. And I'm like, that's the funniest thing I could possibly say because I'm the whitest person in the world. But yeah, man. But no, yeah. So thank you. But yeah, man. Okay, so I think we're pretty much there. I don't want to get too in the weeds. Oh, but I wanted to mention who were some other comic people that like we missed outside of the obvious ones? Like who else did you weave into this piece that we were just like, oh, that's not like that. Oh, God, that seance story. It's still rattling in my head, and it's like, man,
the seance people are old fan or some of the founders of fandom, the guys who sort of did the original sort of 60s fandom stuff, you know, did all like found Alter Ego, Roy Thomas. I'm thinking of others sort of. I mean, you know, Gil Kane, I feel is killed in Watchmen. Like he's it's not him. He has a different name, but it looks just like him. And so I feel like I put some Gil Kane reference in there. There's a ton of comic book crap.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I don't want to. Yeah, I won't make you just rattle off a list, but
I mean, Watchmen had the famous issue. I mean, here's a good comic, but Fearful Symmetry, right? Where they where each panel mirrors the other panel. So panel 1 mirrors the last panel. It kind of goes forward until the middle when you see Ozymandias slam the guy.
Yeah.
And so we didn't want to do that again because because you can't repeat what he did. Sure. And also they did a very good version of that fairly recently in G.I. Joe.
Oh, really?
Well, I think it's about fairly recently. It's like 10 years back now. But yeah, there's a really cool G.I. Joe issue that's like that. That's awesome. And so we did our version of it, which was with these 3 witnesses who all get interviewed at the same time.
Yes.
And And so like we're like, this is our Fearful Symmetry issue. We're going to do something weird with comic books, and you can read that either vertically or horizontally. And the story can be told either way. So that's kind of a cool little, where like just like in that issue where you can read it backwards or forwards, and this one you can read up or down.
Oh,
so
shit.
It was kind of a way to attribute it.
Okay, is that the one where they go back to the where they're telling the stories about the farm?
Yeah, where they're telling the 3 simultaneous stories that take place at 3 different time, but the time periods don't add up. So like it goes like back and forth, and you don't find out to the end how the time periods add up.
Yeah,
it's very hard to write.
Yeah,
it took. I remember I think I even tweeted about it. I was like, why did I make this so hard to write?
Right?
I was like, takes. It was a lot because you had to line everything up perfectly, and the time periods had to act. And, it was hard. But
yeah,
but Jorge and Jorge made it even more complicated than I put it. He made it like in this like 16 panel grids and do all sorts of weird things.
Oh yeah, no, he played with panel layout, which was such a great way to do it. Like just to throw it on its ear and make you question what you're looking at and try and like look at another way. Yeah, because I know part of the element of our channel is we have people here who don't read comics on the regular. So like we have people who legitimately go like, which way do I read this? And I'm like, how do you read it? Left to right, man. He's like, yeah, but what about like, what do I start off? I'm like, you're like a typewriter. You go, nah, unless it doesn't, you know? And,
and then they pick up a manga and they're like, he lied to me.
Yeah. Oh, well, you know, that's a different thing, man. But you should be able to notice from the freaking cover. But then you look at something like what Fornes set up, and it's like, yeah, no, it's deliberately like difficult to read, and you're all over the place. That's dope. Cool, man. All right. Well, I guess that's enough. I don't want to.
It's a lot.
I don't want to keep you up too late, but
I greatly appreciate because we worked hard to put so many layers in it, so it's really nice if someone sees all the layers.
Sure. Well, that's the thing is I don't. That's why you're here, because I'm like, no. I need to know I need to know more about what the hell's happening in this thing. But,
did you get the fingerprints? There's lots of things with fingerprints.
Those are dope. No, it's there. That's one of those things where you must have so much confidence in your collaborator, because you're trying to, like with film, you rely on your actors to convey subtlety. But in this case, you were relying on an artist to convey the subtleties of text. And I can't imagine how stressful that must be for both of you, where it's like, you are conveying it, but they're the one who's executing it.
It's fine with a guy like Jorge. It's not stressful. I don't know.
Well, no, it's not. I'm saying like it's it's stressful because you're writing it and you're like, oh, are we going to get this idea? Do I need to go bigger? And then you get your first like page back and you're like, oh no, we're good. I can go for it and they get it in. I think about that in animation, where I'm like, whenever there's like a subtle moment in The Simpsons from back in the day, and I'm always like, how did they know to do, like, how did they get that moment?
I feel the same way. How did they get that? How did the animators get that from the script and get it so perfectly so that the gag works?
Exactly, because some of those gags are all about like a pause, a breath. There's like that moment when they get the mystery date from Milhouse, and Homer's smile just slowly grows on his face as he realizes it looks like Milhouse, and it's just like, how do you like? But I feel like the same way with comics, where it's like, you hear about like the script, and especially, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already, you should definitely read an Alan Moore script, because they are the most maddening thing you've ever read. Because they are, first of all, they're all in
You'll
caps.
give up after 2 pages.
Because they're all
like yelling at you.
Yeah, it is, and it is. There's no question. It's just like, and then like, no, it's, but it's all caps. It's written on a typewriter, so it's like Courier New, and it's and every single panel is just like, this is what the panel is. And
it's all the background stuff.
There's just almost no room. Unless it's, I did read, have you ever read the script he had for a Gen 13?
No, I didn't.
Oh my God, you got to read his Gen 13 script where he's like, it reads like the Frank Miller script for All-Star Batman and Robin, where it's like, here's some cheesecake. Like, make the fanboys drool. And I'm like, really, Alan? Like, okay, I guess it's 1994 and fuck it, right? Like
that first issue of All-Star Batman and Robin.
Oh my God.
It just starts as a close-up of a girl's ass. Like, whoa.
Yeah, no. And if you read that script, like, it's incredible, because he's like, put all your talents on display, Jim. Let it rip. And I'm like, I mean, he did, but why? All-Star Batman and Robin, man. It's
someday when I'm more drunk, you ask me about my adventure trying to write the sequel to All-Star Bat, or to write the last 4 issues.
The last one you did not really.
I was hired to do that at one point in my career.
Oh my god, we have to talk about that. We don't have to talk. We don't have to record that shit. I just need to know. Now? Can I ask this since you brought it up, and I promise not to get you in trouble, but did Frank write one, or did he just not did he not turn it in, or is it like he went, nah, fuck it?
It was a whole thing. I will say this: both of those men, Jim Lee and Frank Miller, are heroes of mine. I don't want. That's
true.
I deeply adore them, not only as creators, but just as men. I think
as men.
I know Frank had some troubles and he went through some hard times.
He did,
but
yeah.
He's and some of his statements at those hard times reflect those hard times. But he's come out on the other side of it, and he's awesome.
Yeah.
And people have a right to change. And Jim
agree.
has been. I mean, this book here is a testament to Jim, because Jim called us at the beginning of the pandemic and was like, and we're like, Jim, what do we do? What do we do? Is it pencils down? He's like, nope, keep working. He's like, I got your back. You keep working. We'll deal with the consequences of that.
That's awesome.
So those are 2 awesome dudes.
Yeah.
Who managed to make a fucking insane comic together.
That book is but it's so that might be some of the best Jim Lee stuff I've ever seen, where it's like it is just firing on all cylinders and maybe a few extra cylinders. I unabashedly I owe my career to All-Star Batman and Robin. Just talking about it on the couch and being like, there's a moment where, because these two had never seen it before, I opened the page, it's the Batcave scene. I open it up, and then I open it up again, and then again, and then one more time, and they're like, no, and they're like, why? And I'm like, I think it's because Jim just thought it'd be dope.
And it
is dope. It's never been done before.
I own the world's worst splash page from that. Jim.
Do you really? You own a piece of All-Star Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder?
I own. I bought because it was a Jim Lee splash. It was when I didn't have any money, and it was the only one I could afford. And it's a picture of Robin. He's in the cave, and it's literally the whole splash is black. Yep. And there's a little baby Robin head in the middle. That's probably the size of a nickel. And I was like, yeah, Jim Lee splash.
That's that's awesome. How come that's not on the wall? You're like, it is.
Collection here.
That's me with Darrington. When I read Batman Universe, I was like, holy shit, my wife is right. Darrington is awesome. And I bought that page where what's his name? Where Jonah Hex is throwing up, and it's just nothing.
I'm taking it out. The world's worst Jim Lee splash. I own it. So if you ever see us about Heritage, you know I sold it. There it is.
I don't even remember that page.
I talked to him about it. He said, yeah, I did the inks myself. So these are original,
oh my god,
original Jim splatter.
At that point, do you just ink the page and then do you use whiteout to clean it up? Like, that's incredible. That is kind of awesome, by the way. Like, because nowadays it'd be digital.
Yeah, it'd probably be digital. Yeah, that's
right. Like, you wouldn't have
poured on ink.
Yeah, you have to put that shit under some kind of something heavy, lest it just curl forever because of how much ink is on that page.
But when you go back to your table and they're like, "Tom, did you buy some more?" Yeah, I got Jim Lee splash. Let me see. Oh,
are you shitting me? It's a face. Yeah, but it's a full page.
It's All-Star Batman. It's Jim Lee and Frank Miller splash. It's great.
That's fair. That's fair. Only cost me $25,000. But no, man. Thank you so much for indulging me. This is straight up. This is like, I feel bad every time that I have you on. It's never to like promote something. It's just like, hey, can I just talk to you for 45 minutes to just laugh for a while?
I love talking and laughing. I
appreciate
you. I appreciate what you do for comics. You're the one out there screaming for the books, and it makes me incredibly proud of you, my buddy.
Oh, thanks, man. No, I'm the lucky one. I get to read Eisner Award-winning fucking books and then talk about and then make you explain them to me. Right. But no, Lover Everlasting on Substack now. Check it out.
If it's on Substack, it's the paid tier, but you can read the Rorschach 1 script if you want.
Yes, that's right. And that's what
post that.
That's what got me to it, because I got an email about it, and I'm like, okay, that's right. Because I remember, you were like, come on, man, read Rorschach. It's good. And I was like, all right, fine. And I don't know why I had to have my arm twisted. I'm like that, where I'm like, eat your vegetables. And it's like, oh, they actually taste really great. But But yeah, Rorschach on sale. Love Everlasting. Romance comic, not.
It's a horror comic disguised as a romance comic.
Genius. It's
on Substack for free if you want to read it.
Yeah, yeah. Another amazing collaborator, by the way.
Elsa Chartier.
Elsa Chartier. She also is on YouTube, by the way, if you want to watch her stuff. She's not you. I know you watch.
I know. I've been trying to get on her shows. I'm like, Elsa, I know you. Can I get on? No, sorry. You're
no,
this is
a classy show. Like,
so sorry.
That's why I'm not.
You'll have to trim that beard up for this.
But thanks all, everybody. We'll see you guys next time with another episode. Probably not like this, but it'll be fun. Check it out.
Thank you.